Hello and welcome back. Your Northern Agenda podcast is back, bringing you more weekly insights into the big issues affecting the north of England. We've been on a bit of a hiatus in the last few weeks, but now is the perfect time to be appearing back in your podcast feeds. There's just too many fascinating stories in the north of England that aren't getting enough attention. If you've not tuned in before, I'm Rob Parsons, a political journalist based in Yorkshire. I follow the town halls, mayors and MPs across the north and report it all in a daily email newsletter called The Northern Agenda. But I was getting a little bit lonely doing a podcast all by myself, so thought I would invite a mate along to join me who shares my obsessive interest in Northern politics. So allow me to introduce Liam Thorp, political editor of the Liverpool Echo. Now, I don't want to embarrass the poor lad, but Liam has got too many journalism awards to even keep track of. In fact, he was nominated for the prestigious Orwell Prize for Journalism, again, only yesterday. Like me, he is a slightly bleary-eyed dad of young kids and an enthusiast for overpriced craft ale. Liam, is that a pretty good summing up? Anything you'd want to add?
No, I'm grateful for you getting the awards in there, Rob. It saves me a job of bigging myself up later on. But other than that, you pretty much summed me up perfectly as a craft IPA swilling, exhausted dad who attempts to do a bit of journalism on the side. But yeah, I'm really glad to be joining you on the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, listeners should consider us to be like a less well-paid, but perhaps taller and not Geordie, Anton Deck. We'll be getting together every week to talk about the biggest politics stories in the north from a northern perspective. Unlike other northern duos with someone called Liam in there, we won't be charging an arm and a leg to see us in action either, which has to be.
And I'm not sure there'll be quite the same Scrabble for people to sign up to see us, but you never know.
The podcast is only young. We don't want to limit ourselves. We could be as popular as Oasis, given the amount of time in marketing.
Yeah,
who knows? This week we'll be looking at how Nigel Farage's Reform UK have been getting on. Now they have their first Northern MP and run several councils and local authorities in our region. Plus, Liam explains why the Liverpool Echo and Manchester Evening News have been putting their old rivalries aside for a joint front page. And we ask why on earth people have to keep parking on the pavement in Merseyside. If you've got any stories you think we should be talking about, why not drop me a line at rob.parsons@reachplc.com. And a little bit later, to keep things light, we'll both be coming up with the best quirky story we've seen in the north this week and seeing which one most impresses this podcast's producer, Dan. It's an idea that we definitely didn't steal from Matt Chorley's old show on Times Radio, but if you do happen to see him, maybe just don't mention it.
He's BBC now. He's got bigger fish to fry, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, he could be listening. You never know. Let's get on to the first big story of the day. Reform UK, we have to talk about that, really. They are the big force in politics. Nigel Farage's Populist Party has all the momentum, getting all the attention from the media at the moment for what they're saying. But specifically in the north of England, they now have their hands on the levers of power. They got in to take control of Durham County Council, Lancashire County Council. They swept to power in the mayoral elections in Hull and the East Riding and Greater Lincolnshire. They've got hold of a few councils around the country. In fact, even Doncaster Council, they didn't win the mayoral election there, but they do have more councillors than any other party. So they'll be able to hold the elected mayor, Ros Jones, to account. So it means their party is going to go from, I guess, a party largely of opposition, complaining about how bad things are in the country, to actually having to try and do something about some of these problems. So I'm interested, Liam, in I guess what you've made of Reform so far, and why you think that they've done so well. We're a couple of weeks on from the elections where they made these big gains in the council seats, but also they got their first MP in Northern England, Sarah Pochin, I think her name is pronounced as, in Runcorn, Mike Amesbury's old seat. How much have you seen of them so far? What have you seen?
Yeah, well, so we covered the Runcorn and Helsby election. I went out. Runcorn is a part of the Liverpool City region, which is my patch, and so we covered the story of Amesbury's downfall. And to be honest, as soon as the by-election got called, I was fairly certain that Reform would get in. Every time I went out there, it wasn't just a lack of love for Labour there. It had turned into something a bit toxic in the people that I spoke to, and I was actually surprised in the end that it was as close as it was. I didn't, I thought it'd be more than 6 votes in it. Obviously, there's that's still a massive swing. Some would say a massive swing is what got Labour in that mess in the first place. From my game, there we go. He's on with the jokes already. This is what you're going to get. This is what you're going to get now. I think one thing I would really say is that while everyone, and including the Labour government, thinks that the response to reform getting in Runcorn is to try and play reform at their own game on immigration, I would suggest that is not, from my experience, what most people were talking about in Runcorn. Yes, some people did mention it, but the majority of people I spoke to talked more about the state of Runcorn. It's a sort of post-industrial town on the outskirts of Liverpool and Merseyside that has, like many places, feels left behind with a lack of investment. Everyone was telling me that the town centre was, if you'll pardon my French, that was where people felt that they hadn't been supported by politicians. Labour have run the council there for a long time. It's a strong, it's always been a strong Labour MP area in Parliament as well. So for me, that's where the wrong lessons are being learned by the government. We instantly have come out and seen, with complete predictability, the Prime Minister come out and go hard on immigration as a sort of knee-jerk response. That wasn't really what I was hearing. I was hearing our town's been left to kind of rot on, wither on the vine. A lot of people mentioned the winter fuel cuts, loads of people, because there's a big older population there. And I think that we will see that, we have seen that stick to Labour, and we will continue to see that stick to this Labour government. It was one of the first things they did. It's absolutely stuck to them. And people mentioned the benefit cuts as well, because there's a large proportion of people both in and out of work on benefits in Runcorn. So I would urge the Labour government to look at those areas, try and improve people's lives more than immediately just take aim at immigration and immigrants because reform won. So that was my experience on the ground. More broadly on reform, I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see what has been a protest party now having to run organisations. And as someone who's covered, local government for a long time, 12 years now, it isn't always that sexy. It's easy for Farage to stand up and make these big kind of populist shouts, but when you're dealing with a crisis in adult social care on a council, it's probably not quite as news headline grabbing as that party has been used to in some ways. But one funny anecdote I heard was that I think it was in Lincolnshire where Reform sort of said, right, now the county council are going to have to sack all their diversity officers, and the council came back and said, fair enough, but we don't have any. I thought, right, okay, well, that's one policy achieved already, isn't it? Like, it feels like you're going to get a bit of it's going to be a bit of a clash of like their rhetoric versus the reality of the difficulties of local government, and it's very, very different, and it's very, very difficult as well. So they won't be able to kind of just shout from the sidelines anymore. They are now in actual power, running actual organisations, and we'll see beyond those kind of sound bites that we hear from them so often what they're like when they're actually running an organisation.
Yeah, and I suspect the things that you heard in Runcorn, the state of the high street, the fact that people don't have as much money in their pockets as they used to, the fact that they feel their area is being left behind other areas. There's countless places across the north, including places in, like the likes of Doncaster or Lancashire or Durham, where local voters could say that. And I haven't heard very much, if anything, from Nigel Farage or Reform in general about how they would tackle those problems. Like you say, it was in Durham, in fact, that Nigel Farage went on the day after the local elections and turned up and gave a speech to say, if you work in diversity, equality or inclusion in Durham Council, you should probably go and get another job very quickly because your days are numbered. So that's fine. He doesn't like the diversity agenda, but we know he doesn't like net zero. He wants to impose a tax on net zero jobs, but we don't really know what positive vision Reform actually has, what they will actually do whilst in power, which is why, at the moment, up until now, being in opposition has really suited them. I was really struck by the new Runcorn MP, Sarah Potchin's maiden speech in the House of Commons, which she gave this week, and she identified asylum accommodation in the town as that was a big issue that she really focused on, and said all the problems that was causing, plus the net zero, which she described as a white elephant. So it's clear that they're going to keep pushing these agendas for as much as they can, but like it's not really going to help them running the council. It's not going to boost the economies of places like Bishop Auckland.
It's not going to fill potholes, is it? It's not going to sort out social care for people's grandparents. Like, these are the as I said before, they're not particularly sexy, very difficult on the ground decisions that anyone who's got any knowledge of local government particularly knows are the biggest problems that these councils face every day. So when Farage comes in and says, "Oh, we want to do a Doge style," or the general reform idea of a Doge style cuts on local government, I'm like, well, where do you think there is to cut in local government? It's the stick that's been routinely beaten again and again and again, through previous governments, when during the austerity years had hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds cut from councils. I speak to council leaders now in my job, and they say we can barely keep the lights on. We're basically now just providing the absolute bare essential services, mainly around adult social care. In some councils, it's like 75% of their budget. So where you think, and that's statutory, you have to provide that stuff. So where they think they can swoop in and do all these like amazing cuts, stop, because they'll make loads of money from stopping people wearing lanyards or whatever. Reality is going to bite fairly quickly, I think. And as you say, in these organisations, the reality versus the kind of rhetoric is going to be a really fascinating clash, I think.
That brings me on to the Hull and East Yorkshire, which has a new mayor, Luke Campbell, former boxer, Olympic gold medal winning boxer from Hull, was elected. I think you describe it as a landslide victory, really.
Well, he described it as a knockout blow in every headline writer's dream. So
indeed, well, it's the obvious joke to make.
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. He did win very comfortably in Hull. It's not surprising given he's a local boy. But I chaired a hustings for the Hull Daily Mail, where he and the other candidates were debating the issues. And the one thing that really struck me was just how little Luke Campbell had to say about quite sort of really specific issues relating to Hull and the East Riding, and what his job would be as mayor, that you would really expect someone running for an office like that to have some better answers to. For example, he was asked, he was talking about what his priorities would be, and the main thing that he mentioned was, as Metro Mayor of Hull and the East Riding, he would clamp down on council waste. So the two local councils in his patch, Hull Council, East Riding Council, he says are wasting money on projects that they don't need to waste money on. There's a regeneration project in Hull that's gone over budget. He would hold these councils to account to stop the money being spent. And that was a message that we heard from Reform around the country, that cracking down on council waste, as they see it, was their big thing, which I guess is fine, legitimate, I suppose, to talk about that if you're running for a council election. But it's not the job of a Metro Mayor to cut down on council spending. It's not in their remit. No. They don't have any powers to do that. It's not the reason why Metro Mayor roles were set up in the first place.
It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the kind of power dynamics and the levers within local government and Metro mayoral roles work.
Yeah, if Andy Burnham got elected and said, the main thing I'm going to do is stop Rochdale and Oldham councils spending money on this, that and the other, people will be saying, well, that's not your job to do that. And this was pointed out to Luke Campbell, but he stuck to his guns. The other concerning thing I thought was, he was asked about Reform UK's stance on net zero, which is very clear. They don't think they don't think the country should be pursuing net zero as a goal. They don't think Nigel Farage would impose extra tariffs on net zero businesses. He would concentrate on oil and gas industries instead. And so people legitimately would ask Luke Campbell, as Hull Mayor, standing in an area where the economy does to a large extent depend on clean energy jobs, things like offshore wind, carbon capture, hydrogen, stuff like that. Those are really big. There's a really big deal either side of the Humber. What does he think about that? Does he think reform should be imposing taxes on that? And he just wouldn't answer the question. Basically, he doesn't seem to have a view on that. So I don't know how he's going to resolve that contradiction. And from business people I'm speaking to in the area, they're pretty concerned that it's a big opportunity getting a metro mayor. You get all these powers, you get extra money. You are the visible face of your region, and Hull and the East Riding have elected someone who, as far as I can see, doesn't have a particularly clear grasp of how his job works or what he'll be focusing on in power. It's a big concern, I think.
Now, Rob, you may not be particularly impressed by some of Reform's policies or lack thereof, but would you be impressed by the offer of 2 pints for just £6 at a Reform-themed pub in Blackpool?
Well, certainly the first bit. two pints for £6. It's like 2005 prices, isn't it?
I mean, honestly, like I could, drop any kind of political associations for 2 pints for £6. But yeah, this is the story of the Talbot pub, which is now under the stewardship of co-owners Pete Flynn and landlord Nick Lowe. And it's the first Reform-themed pub. What's the? I don't really understand what the kind of idea is behind it, because they say in the piece I was reading from the Gazette that we're not here to talk politics, we're just here to bring people together. So I don't really.
Why be a Reform pub then?
Why would you have a party political pub if you're not here to talk politics? I suggest there will be a fair amount of politics in there. I mean, it's all part of this kind of image, isn't it? Farage constantly seen with a pint. I'd love to know if he actually drinks pints in public, or if he's more of a sort of champagne and whiskey guy. But yeah, Nick, there's some good quotes there. Nick Lowe, the guy, says, "We've seen too many pubs turn into soulless lounges or shut down altogether. This is a pub where people can speak their mind, have a laugh, and not be judged." I mean, most pubs I go to, people still very much do speak their mind. I can.
Yeah, I don't feel unable to speak my mind when I go to the pub, even if it was a sort of woke pub serving craft ales and 0% lagers. Like I still think I'd be able to. I'm not being told what I can and can't say.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you, Rob, that if you're interested, Nick Lowe says that the Talbot will indeed serve Remainer tears, chilled.
I imagine you could probably get an old peculiar as well.
Oh yeah,
well, that's the name of the patrons, not the beer.
Yeah, well said. Shall we talk about trains?
Yes, we should. So, what I want to know is, why are the Manchester Evening News and Liverpool Echo teaming, big rival newspapers from rival cities across the northwest? Why are they teaming up to issue a joint front page call to the government? Take me through that.
Yeah, so there was a lot of discussions about getting the tone right, about dropping rivalries, setting down our hostilities. Liverpool and Manchester, obviously, big rivals in many ways, largely football. I think it's fair to say there's a kind of bit of an ongoing battle for sort of bragging rights in general across the northwest. Although, and I say this from as someone who lives in Liverpool, obviously it's hard to kind of disagree that Manchester is very much certainly the economic centre of the region. But I would add that Liverpool, as a sort of visitor and tourist centre, is a very powerful attraction as well. This campaign it's been led really by the actions of the two mayors, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, who were down in London yesterday, lobbying government for support and investment for their big vision for a new Liverpool-Manchester railway. And we and our colleagues at the MEN, obviously we're under the same company, which we all are, of course, Rob. And I know you work with both of the big titles quite a lot. We decided it was time to kind of collaborate and say, look, the Northwest and the wider North has been so badly served by governments, by successive governments, in general, investment in general. But the tangible thing that we can always point to is transport. And we know, don't we, from countless studies, we know that good public transport creates economic opportunities, creates wealth, creates jobs. And anyone who's had to get the train between Liverpool and Manchester, as I frequently do, should find it absolutely ludicrous that for a journey of 35, 40 miles, you're averaging 55 minutes, sometimes over an hour. Trains often delayed, trains often cancelled. It's kind of daft when you think about it, between these two great cities. So Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham have made the case for it's not just about a higher speed rail line between the two cities. There's a lot that they're asking for in terms of an underground station at Piccadilly to help with onward journeys. In Liverpool, we're looking at an expanded Liverpool Central Station and Lime Street, which would potentially be connected. The vision, I'm told, is a kind of King's Cross, St Pancras style super terminal thing. And
so it's not just transport, is it? It's the idea is that you would have housing and employment built into the visions for all the different areas where there are new stations.
Yeah, you unlock the wider regeneration in those city centres around that. And the other thing, which is new actually, that came out in the new report from the Liverpool Manchester Railway Board, which was set up by the mayors, is a totally new station called the Liverpool Gateway Station on the outskirts, because they need to try and free up capacity and figure out new ways into the city. So, this is big picture stuff. We're not talking anytime soon. I think they said in the report, it wouldn't be until the 2030s until work started. But even if they can do that, they want that because that would be quite soon. Because you've reported on it like me, that when the last, in the dying embers of the Tory government, when I think they were pretty much promising anything that they wanted because they knew they were going out of power, there was this big promise from the Transport Secretary about this new line between Manchester and Liverpool. Now, when I interviewed Louise Hay during her brief time as Transport Secretary at the Labour conference after Labour's win, she very honestly said, look, and everything that the Tories basically dished out, all the promises, all the commitments, are having to be looked at again because they had this massive deficit. They had the 22 billion black hole. And it was suddenly a bit of a flashpoint between the mayors, because when we spoke to Andy Burnham at the same time, he said, no, and I'm pretty sure that we're still owed that money for that railway. It's still going to happen. And it's been kind of gone away a bit after that. We haven't really heard much about it. And this is the mayors kind of bringing it back onto the agenda and saying, look, it's not just about we need better transport. It's about look at what it could do for the country. Because I think Manchester particularly has a very compelling argument, which is that while the general growth in the country is pretty stagnant, Manchester is flying, isn't it, economically? And it's saying, look what the North can do to bring UK growth forward, to unlock, they reckon, across the whole Northern Arc, as they call it, a potential for £90 billion. I mean, I haven't checked these numbers out. They're quite big, but there's no doubt that there's untapped potential here across the North. And the first step towards tapping that potential up is connecting the great cities in a much, much more reliable way.
Yeah, I mean, it always seems, I think a lot of people would say it seems a bit as a sort of sad reflection of the way the country works, that two metro mayors from the north of England are having to take the train down to London to almost go cap in hand to government to say, can we have the money for this vital transport scheme that we need? It's not the first time, I think, in the last few weeks that Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham have gone down to London to plead their case with the Treasury, because ultimately it is the Treasury, Rachel Reeves's department, that will decide whether this happens or not. And interestingly, we're recording this on Thursday. Tomorrow, Friday, in Leeds, there's going to be a big event where David Blunkett, former Education Secretary under Labour, is going to unveil a report saying that Yorkshire needs £14 billion to upgrade its Victorian rail infrastructure, plus another £2.5 billion so that Leeds finally gets the tram that it's been waiting for years. So that's 16 billion in Yorkshire. The Northwest wants 17 billion. I think other different parts of the North want multiple billions for their transport system. So everyone's going to be waiting for the spending review next month. And
all I'm hearing is that there's going to be cuts.
Well, yeah, exactly. It'd be very surprising if everyone got what they wanted out of the spending review. So it means someone is going to be left unhappy, which is obviously not a good situation. And also, I feel like all these big conversations about transport infrastructure always have the failure of HS2 hanging over them, because HS2 has been such a debacle, a catastrophe from start to finish, and so much money has been spent on it that, and obviously one of the big mistakes was not building it from the north downwards. The fact that they started the plans in London and built it outwards means that we've been left with, this £100 billion railway that doesn't go any further north than Birmingham. And now Andy Burnham is asking for more money, I think, to try and resurrect an alternative to HS2 to alleviate the sort of capacity issues on the West Coast. So there's a lot of people who want money for infrastructure, and I think we could bring it back to the conversation we were just having about reform. Andy Burnham was saying yesterday in London that this Labour government needs a good story to tell in the north of England about what a Labour government is actually doing. I think there's been precious little in the 10 months or so of this Labour government that they could really latch onto and say, this is what we're doing for the north, and those are the conditions in which Reform UK thrive and win votes in the way that they have been doing. So I think a lot of people will be watching this with interest from a party political as well as sort of economic standpoint.
Totally agree. And I'd just say on that point that what's going to be quite interesting going forward, particularly around Burnham, because he is obviously such a big name. There was a lot of talk when Labour were coming into power. I'm sure you had it when you were interviewing the largely Labour northern mayors, how great it was going to be working with a Labour government. We've been sort of butting our heads against the Tories for so long, not getting a lot, not getting listened to as much as we should do. Suddenly, Labour government comes in. Do you remember that first? It was like only a couple of days in when they were all invited down to Downing Street. They're all smiles, get down to business. And then now we're reaching this sort of impasse, aren't we? Where Starmer and Reeves are saying, "Sorry, we haven't got any money," and Burnham and Rotherham are there knocking on their door saying, "Well, hold on, we've got a Labour government now. I've told all my constituents that things are going to be better, and we're going to have projects, and we're going to have the investment that we've been lacking." And it's going to reach an awkward point. And I think you're already seeing it happening, because I don't think it will be particularly looked on particularly helpfully by Reeves and co. That two big northern mayors are coming down and demanding cash. It might get to a slightly difficult situation where the mayors have to start criticising the government. And I think Andy Burnham particularly is happy to do that where he feels it's necessary. So yeah, that's an interesting one to watch going forward. That relationship between those. We know that the relationship between Burnham and Starmer in the past has been a bit frosty. That seems to have improved, but these guys have got to stand up for the people that voted them in, and they've made promises to them based on a better relationship and more investment and more, more prioritising of the North and their regions by a Labour government. So that has to happen somehow.
Yeah, let's see if it does. I imagine we'll be talking about that again in a future episode. Before we move on to our quirky light stories, just very quickly, Liam, why... I'm seeing a lot of articles in the Liverpool Echo. You've written quite a few of them about people parking on the pavement in Liverpool. It seems to be a particular issue in your part of the world. I guess in other parts of the country as well. But what's going on there?
I'm sure it's an issue in other parts of the country as well. They just perhaps don't have such a irritated political editor as myself.
Award-winning, Orwell Prize-nominated journalist.
Yeah, I must say that the award I've been nominated for there is nothing to do with pavement parking. This is more of a solo campaign. It's something that really winds me up, and it's something that really winds a lot of our readers up, and it does seem to be a particular issue in Liverpool. This is people parking either partly or fully on pedestrian pavement, and it happens. There are some cases where it's unavoidable. There are a lot of quite tight terrace streets in Liverpool where if you want to be able to let cars go down in the middle of the road, you have to park on pavements either side. But the difference between parking a bit on the pavement and parking substantially on the pavement is about the selfishness and the laziness and the effect it has on pedestrians. And of course, the main people I'm thinking about here are people in wheelchairs and people like me and you, Rob, when we're pushing our prams around. And I have found this even increasingly more annoying and increasingly more irritating since I've had a pram and a child. I should say there's a child in the pram. I'm not just pushing an empty pram around. that would be weird. It's you are talking about forcing parents into the street with their babies. We went out with a lady called Pam Thomas, who's a wheelchair user, and did some filming with her to just show what she's up against. She was having to completely change her day and her plan because of the way people are parking. And it is something that really... And I also went out on a rather eventful one where we'd been sent some pictures outside of pavement parking outside a primary school. Absolutely atrocious. People parking all over the pavement, all over grass verges. It was like some sort of destruction derby was taking place. And I went down there with one of our videographers, and we sort of confronted a few of these parents. They did not like being filmed. And their argument was there was nowhere to park and there wasn't enough space and stuff. And I was like, I don't think there's really any excuse for parking like that, particularly in front of in front of your kids. So yeah, it's something that we keep reporting on. Not to get too into the weeds about it, but it's quite difficult because the council here says that they don't have enough power to really take action on it. Police it can't be a massive priority for the police with what they're dealing with elsewhere. So yeah, it's a difficult one. We have seen a little bit more movement in terms of people, the council put in bollards and benches and things in particular problem areas. But until this is something that you have to get through to people. Just think about others. Don't be so selfish. Don't be so lazy.
It's a sort of attitude thing, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
And yes, a sort of sense of entitlement that people have. Yeah. I mean, I must admit, my kids are a bit older now, so 8 and 5. So luckily, my pushchair days are behind me. I'm lucky enough that my school is sort of in walking distance. Yeah. But sometimes, my kids will complain they don't want to walk. It's raining, or they're tired, or whatever. I do have to say to them, it'll make your legs stronger. You'll be able to run like Usain Bolt if you start walking to school. It's not always the easiest conversation to have, but I think people just do need to have a look at themselves.
I am a little concerned that as I sort of approach the upper echelon of my mid-30s, I am resembling more and more the old man yells at cloud Simpsons meme. But these things do tend to. I've just written an opinion piece about there being too many convenience stores in Liverpool as well. So my wife does say that the writing is an outlet for my grumpiness.
Well, you could always go to the Reform pub in Blackpool, couldn't you?
Yeah,
that'd be a good place. No one's going to tell you what to think there.
Yeah, but
you can have your own opinions on anything.
I've not got a taste for Remainer Tears yet, so I'll save that one for now.
Well, yes, quite right too. So let's finish off, Liam, with an as yet unnamed item. We'll maybe think of a name for it next week.
We'll see how successful it is this week, yeah. And then
maybe we'll just forget about it if it doesn't quite work. We both identified a quirky, light story from the news in the north, and we're gonna in a second we'll bring in wonderful producer Dan, who will give his opinion on which of our light stories is the best. Do you want to go first, or shall I go first?
I'll go first, Rob. And yeah, so this I'm not always going to pick my own stories, but I am going to this week, and that's not to say anything about a lack of research on my part. But this was one that did tickle me because it came in. It came in initially as what could have been a worrying story and turned out to be a very amusing one. So that helped as well. So we received a message. A parent said that they had been worried because they heard that their school had gone into lockdown. Now, this is Notre Dame Catholic Academy in Everton in Liverpool, and we have had obviously you do get occasional worrying stories about schools having to lock their doors, go into lockdown because there might be someone with a weapon outside and things like that. We have reported on, and it's kind of every parent's worst nightmare, that isn't it, to hear that from your kid's school. However, when the reality came out, this parent said they went from being terrified to crying their eyes out with laughter, and that is because the action to lock the school down was taken because 3 seagulls had made their way into the school overnight and there's no other word for it, were running amok inside the school as the kids arrived. What I really liked about this as well was sometimes it's hard to kind of contact schools, and they're understandably a bit wary about journalists, but the head teacher, Victoria Taylor, was just really great with us, sent us a really sort of fun comment about it, and I'll read that to you now. So she said, on Friday, May the 9th, Notre Dame Catholic Academy ended a partial lockdown after 3 seagulls made themselves at home in the building overnight. Despite our best efforts, coaxing, persuading, and even tempting them with a tin of tuna, the birds refused to leave. Their unexpected presence caused quite a stir as they swooped through the halls, attempting to snatch toast and bagels from our free breakfast trolley. It's a little plug for Labour's new policy there. Unfortunately, students also had to contend with seagull droppings landing uncomfortably close to their chairs, which is, I think, any reason to bunk off school, that's a good one.
Yeah, what a thing to be talking about in the playground the next day.
I know, exactly.
The talk of the playground.
But credit to the school, they took swift action to make sure that the birds could be removed. They called pest control. The birds were removed, and they got on with their day. And it was a fun page 3 story for us, which the school enjoyed, and it got well read online. So the headline that our print guys came up with, who were very good at this, because Notre Dame Academy did used to be single sex, and the headline was, "Didn't this used to be a girls' school?"
Oh, that is good. That is good. I like that. Very, very nice indeed.
Should we hear yours and see what Dan thinks?
Yeah, absolutely. So my story also from the Liverpool Echo, actually, originally. And it's in a way hilarious, but also imagine if I was in the shoes of these people. So Stephen Robinson and his wife, Michelle, from St Helens, I would be slightly terrified. Yeah. It does sound like a bit of an ordeal. So Stephen and his wife, Michelle, went to Blackpool for a leisurely day out. During their visit, as you do, they decided to drop by Madame Tussauds, the renowned wax museum. They were having a great time meandering through the exhibits until, upon trying to exit, they realised that they'd been locked in. Everything had been locked up and the lights had been turned off. And it turned out that they were accidentally locked inside the museum with waxworks of people like Ollie Murs.
That is.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it does sound like the start of a plot for a horror movie.
Night at the Museum.
Ollie Murs' waxwork comes alive and starts tormenting these poor holiday makers. But luckily, they got out unharmed. The police came and the owners came and sorted them out. But it must have been a rather challenging trip to Madame Tussauds, I think, for these two holiday makers.
Can I tell you, because I actually sit next to the journalist Megan Banner, who did that story originally, and my favourite moment of all of it was when she said that they'd been stood near waxworks of Deirdre and Ken Barlow from Coronation Street, and the guy said, because they've been there so long, when they got home and put Coronation Street on, he thought he had PTSD from seeing them so much. So yeah, I absolutely love that story. Brilliant.
Superb. Right, now it's time to bring in the arbiter of best quality story of the day, producer Dan, looking resplendent as always, Dan. So Dan, what's your verdict? Which of those we got? The Madame Tussauds lock-in or the seagulls running amok in a Liverpool
And just
school?
To say, no pressure, Dan, but this may sort of establish a dynamic of our relationship working going forward for the foreseeable future. So dropping that in there.
So Liam, Rob went for the flattery. I look resplendent. You went for the emotional blackmail.
Two very different tactics there.
Carrot and stick.
We'll see what works. I mean, I do like the seagull story very much. You know, I can imagine it's a bit like Finding Nemo. Mine. But as a Doctor Who fan, the thing that terrifies me the most is the autons, which is the plastic dolls and things coming to life. So I can imagine sort of the Madame Tussauds turning into a Doctor Who episode. Plus, there used to be a cracking Doctor Who museum at Blackpool once upon a time, and the idea of Ollie Murs coming live to traumatise people, I think just by singing probably is
that's as scary as it gets, isn't it?
That gets it over the line. So, and just to say that there is a Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussauds, which my brother used to unkindly call my Auntie June's living room. But I think it's got to be the Blackpool story, really.
Well, there you go.
1-0, Rob.
An early 1-0 lead for Parsons. Let's see how it goes.
You know what they say, Rob? Sometimes it's dangerous to score early. Let's see how next.
Yeah, 1-0 is a dangerous score, isn't it? Yeah. It could easily go the other way if we remember to do this feature again next week. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Much appreciated. And Liam, thank you for your time. Hope you've enjoyed the first episode of the newly relaunched Northern Agenda, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.